The grand hall glistened under countless chandeliers, but for Taehyung, nothing shone. Every laugh, every flash of a camera, every whispered congratulations felt like shards of ice piercing his chest. Jungkook, please don't do this, he wanted to say, but the words lodged in his throat, unspoken, powerless, against the roar of a crowd that was watching everything. Outside, Seoul glimmered through the rain-streaked windows, a city alive and oblivious to the storm consuming him inside. He stood frozen, heart hammering, eyes fixed on Jungkook. The boy who had shared every secret, every doubt, every sleepless night with him was now slipping through his fingers, stepping into a life that didn't have room for them anymore. Jungkook's tuxedo fit perfectly, the silver ring gleaming like a mocking beacon of inevitability. Taehyung could see it in his hands, the subtle tremor betraying every ounce of hesitation and doubt that he had tried to hide beneath the mask of composure. Memories crashed over him unrelentingly, whispered confessions in empty practice rooms, hands brushing under the table during interviews, late-night ramen runs when no one else was awake, promises spoken under the blanket of night. He remembered Jungkook's fear of being alone in the world, the way he clung to Taehyung like he could be the only thing keeping him grounded. And yet now, surrounded by applause, they were strangers performing their parts on the stage the world had built for them. Taehyung's hands shook at his sides. He could feel the weight of years compressed into this single moment, the weight of loyalty, love, and the unbearable expectation of a world that demanded perfection. He had protected Jungkook from rumors, shielded him from the scandals that could have torn them apart, carried the silent burden of knowing that the world would never understand. And now, watching him place a ring on another's finger, the walls he had built around his own heart began to crumble. The ceremony unfolded relentlessly, vows spoken with mechanical precision, smiles that were meant to be perfect but felt hollow. Every clap, every flash, every murmur of awe was a knife. Taehyung moved through the crowd like a ghost, each congratulation piercing deeper, each polite smile, a reminder of the life he had lost before it had even begun. His mind raced, recalling every private moment with Jungkook, the years of unspoken love that could never find daylight in a world obsessed with appearances. By the time the after-party swirled with champagne and hollow laughter, Taehyung had retreated entirely into himself. He drifted through the room, untouched by celebration, consumed instead by the ache of absence. He caught familiar faces across the room, friends, mentors, even family eyes heavy with expectation and pity, and he felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Everyone waited for a breakdown, for tears, for anger. He gave none. When he finally returned to his hotel room, the silence pressed against him like a living thing. Sunlight filtered through rain-streaked glass, illuminating the solitude he had chosen. Messages poured in, some from friends, some from reporters, some cruel, most confused. He answered none. Instead, he packed methodically, each movement a ritual of letting go. Photographs, trinkets, gifts from the dorm days, all left behind. A folded letter slipped from his pocket, written months ago, unread and unsent. If you're reading this, it's because I can't stay anymore, he had written, pouring his heart onto paper, knowing that the words might never reach Jungkook. Now, he tucked it into the drawer, closed the suitcase, and left the hotel key behind. Rain slapped his face as he stepped into the street, a single figure vanishing into a cold gray morning. No staff, no disguise, no entourage, just him and the city indifferent to his heartbreak. On the plane, Taehyung pressed his forehead against the window, watching Seoul shrink beneath him. Every building, every bridge, every river seemed to mock him with memories of laughter and whispered promises. He wasn't just leaving Korea, he was leaving a part of himself, the only version that had ever known true happiness. At 40,000 feet, tears finally came freely, unrestrained. He didn't know if Jungkook would ever read the letter or if the silence between them would ever heal. But for now, he let himself feel the weight of departure, the ache of love he could never claim in the world that demanded he hide it. Paris wasn't supposed to feel like this. The rain-soaked streets blurred into streaks of neon light, a city alive with motion while Taehyung felt suspended in a haze of memory and longing. He moved like a shadow, every step measured, his heart still tethered to the image of Jungkook at the altar. The weight of the unsent letter, the confessions that would never reach their intended ears, pressed down on him like lead. He reached the small, rented apartment Taehyung had arranged, the place meant to be temporary, a hiding spot from the world that demanded perfection. But perfection had never been his or Jungkook's dream. Here, the city smelled of rain and asphalt, a bitter reminder that the world outside would not stop. And yet, in the quiet of this tiny space, he could breathe, even if just for a moment, even if the air was thick with unresolved emotion. Taehyung sank onto the edge of the bed, running his hands over his face. He could still feel Jungkook's presence from earlier, the way he had trembled, hesitated, and yet chosen a life that didn't include him. He pressed his palms to his eyes, wishing he could erase the memory, wishing he could go back and hold Jungkook, tell him everything before it was too late. But the choice had been made and the world had already moved on, or so it seemed. His phone buzzed incessantly. Messages, notifications, missed calls. Taehyung's face appeared in a video call, drenched in rain, eyes wide with urgency. Taehyung, you need to understand. He's not okay. He keeps asking for you. He can't manage the weight of this without seeing you. Taehyung's chest tightened, a familiar panic rising. What do you mean he keeps asking? He's married. He can't. His voice cracked. He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't say what he truly felt. His heart had already abandoned him to a reckless, impossible hope. Taehyung, listen to me. Taehyung's voice was sharp, almost trembling with frustration and fear. You know him. You know what he needs. You can't just let this break him. A storm raged outside, mirroring the turmoil inside him. Memories tore through him, late-night confessions, stolen smiles, hands brushing under tables, whispered promises in the shadows. He remembered Jungkook's eyes, wide and conflicted at the altar, caught between duty and desire. The boy he had loved, the boy who had loved him in return, was unraveling somewhere in this world without him. The knock at the door jolted him. It was urgent, insistent, almost desperate. He froze, heart hammering. Taehyung's voice filtered through. Open the door, now. Cautiously, Taehyung approached, and looked through the peephole. Rain-soaked and shivering, a woman unfamiliar yet radiating urgency stood there. "You have to help him?" she gasped, tears streaming down her face. "He's not well. Please, Jungkook, he needs you. He's lost." Every instinct screamed to flee, to avoid entanglement, but something deeper, primal, rooted him to the spot. He unlocked the door. She stumbled inside, collapsing near him, voice barely audible above the pounding of his own heart. "He won't talk to anyone, not even his wife. He keeps asking for you. Please, you have to go." Taehyung grabbed his jacket, ignoring the rain, ignoring the cold, ignoring the world outside. Every street, every passing car, every glare of neon lights blurred as he thought only of Jungkook, only of the boy who had haunted his every waking moment. Every memory, every laugh, every secret held in shadow propelled him forward. When they arrived at the hotel where Jungkook was staying, the hallways were silent, oppressive, every creak echoing in Taehyung's ears. And then, finally, he saw him. Jungkook sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders slumped, eyes glazed with exhaustion and guilt. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The mask of perfection, the facade of composure, all shattered into fragments scattered across the floor. Taehyung dropped to his knees before him. "Why did you do it?" His voice was almost childlike in its pleading, the vulnerability of years of suppressed love finally surfacing. Jungkook's face twisted in torment. I I I was scared. Scared of what they'd do to you, to us. I thought I could live without you if it meant you'd be safe. But I can't. I can't do this alone. Taehyung shook his head, tears streaming freely. "It's too late. You're married, Jungkook." "I don't care." Jungkook's voice shattered, raw and desperate. "None of this means anything if you're not here. I told myself I could move on, but I can't. I'm breaking. I'm breaking without you." The room held its breath. The confessions hung heavy, unsparing, impossible to ignore. And in that suspended moment, Taehyung realized something profound. The world could try to claim them, the industry could try to dictate their lives, but nothing could erase this truth. Their hearts were entwined, fragile yet unyielding. Outside, the storm lashed against the windows, but inside, an ember of defiance flickered. For the first time in years, Taehyung understood. Running away, hiding, disappearing, it hadn't been escape. It had been survival. And survival wasn't enough. He needed to fight for Jungkook, for them, for the love they had tried to bury under years of expectation and silence. The silence in the room was heavy, almost suffocating. Jungkook's chest rose and fell in ragged breaths, the weight of guilt and relief tangled in each exhale. Taehyung's hands hovered over him, unsure whether to touch, to pull him close, or simply remain still and witness the storm of emotions unraveling before them. The apartment felt smaller than it should, the walls closing in as the world outside threatened to break through. I didn't want to hurt anyone," Jungkook whispered, voice trembling, eyes fixed on some distant point that only he could see. "I thought maybe if I followed the plan, if I went through with it, everything would be fine, that I could bury us, and no one would get hurt." "Jungkook," Taehyung said softly, leaning closer, voice almost a whisper, but carrying every ounce of the love he had hidden for years. Everything you try to bury, it's still here. We can't erase it, but we can face it together. You're not alone anymore. Jungkook's head bowed, tears slipping down his cheeks. I'm scared, Taehyung, scared of what they'll do, scared of the world seeing us like this, like me. Taehyung's fingers grazed Jungkook's cheek, tilting his head up to meet his gaze. Then let them see it. Let them see the truth. We're done hiding. We've been silent for too long, and it's time someone told the story that matters, the one between us. The words hung in the air, heavy with defiance and hope. Outside, the rain pounded against the windows like a drumbeat, as if urging them forward. Taehyung felt a fire ignite in his chest, the kind that had been dormant for years under the pressure of expectations, contracts, and public image. This was their moment. Not the media, not the label, not the world, they could finally choose themselves. Suddenly, the knocking at the door escalated, urgent and insistent. The reality of the world outside crashed back in. Taehyung's heart jumped. They're here, he murmured, voice tight. We don't have much time. Taehyung appeared at the door, soaked from the rain, eyes wide with adrenaline. They know where you are, he said, breathless. Reporters, managers, everyone is looking for you. You need to move now. Taehyung glanced at Jungkook, whose face was pale but resolute. In that instant, all hesitation vanished. They had run, hidden, and suffered in silence long enough. Taehyung nodded, gripping Jungkook's hand firmly. Then we faced them, together. The drive through Paris was a blur. Neon lights reflected off rain-slick streets, passing cars a streak of color in the dark. Every turn, every shadow made Taehyung's pulse quicken, but he refused to let fear dictate their steps. Beside him, Jungkook squeezed his hand, a silent reassurance, a promise that no matter what happened, they were no longer alone. When they reached the temporary safe house, the tension didn't ease. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant shout of reporters outside reminded them that the world was watching, waiting. Yet inside, a quiet determination settled over them. Taehyung's eyes met Jungkook's, and in that gaze, he saw every memory, every secret, every stolen smile they had shared. They didn't need words, they both knew what had to be done. Taehyung quickly set up a laptop for a live stream. The moment you speak, make it count, he urged, voice low but insistent. Your words, your truth, don't let them spin it. Jungkook inhaled sharply, fingers trembling over the keyboard. Taehyung rested a steady hand on his shoulder. You're not alone. I'm right here. Say it, say everything. And then, as the camera went live, the world outside disappeared. The rain, the lights, the reporters, all irrelevant. Jungkook's voice shook at first, raw and vulnerable, but grew stronger with every word. I got married because I thought it would fix everything, but I lied. I hurt the people I love. I was scared of the world seeing the truth. I'm done running. I love Taehyung. I always have. Taehyung stepped forward, standing behind him, voice steady, unwavering. We're not asking for forgiveness. We're asking to live. You can hate us, love us, ignore us, but this is who we are. This is our truth. The chat exploded instantly. Hearts, anger, disbelief, and support all flooding the same stream. Taehyung felt a wave of adrenaline, a mix of fear and relief washing over him. Jungkook's hand found his fingers intertwining in a small but unbreakable grip. For the first time in years, they were free, not from the world, not from consequences, but from silence. The truth had been spoken, and no label, no headline, no expectation could erase it. The night stretched on, each moment heavier than the last. Yet, in the chaos, in the uncertainty, Taehyung finally let himself breathe. They had survived the altar, the expectations, the secrecy, and now, in the glow of Paris street lights filtering through the windows, they could start to rebuild together. Did we do the right thing? Jungkook's voice was barely audible, tinged with guilt and fear. Taehyung, we've ruined everything. Taehyung shook his head firmly, pressing a hand to Jungkook's back. We've only just taken it back. The truth was ours to give. We didn't ruin anything. We finally lived it. His voice grew firmer, carrying a conviction that surprised even himself. No one else gets to write our story. The room fell silent, except for the faint buzz of notifications on Jungkook's phone, hundreds, thousands, flooding in from every corner of the globe. Taehyung's heart thudded with every incoming message, every mention, every thread and post. The world had watched, judged, gasped, and yet it was no longer hidden. That, in itself, was freedom. Minutes stretched into hours. They moved cautiously, aware that outside forces, managers, labels, media were already mobilizing. Taehyung had been pacing, constantly refreshing feeds, noting every trending hashtag, every viral clip. They're calling it a scandal, a PR disaster, he muttered, rubbing his temples. Some are angry, some confused, some pissingly supportive. But it's blowing up faster than I can track. Jungkook leaned against Taehyung, exhaling shakily. I thought I could handle everything, that I could hide what I really felt. I was wrong. Every day I lied to myself, to everyone. His voice broke, trailing into silence. Taehyung pressed his forehead against Jungkook's shoulder. You're here now. You told the truth. That's the only thing that matters. He felt a tremor in his own chest, the weight of years of unspoken words, stolen glances, and carefully hidden touches finally released. The ache in his heart was still there, raw and jagged, but it was a different ache, now one tinged with hope. The apartment door clicked softly, then a cautious knock. Taehyung's voice followed, urgent but measured. We need to move. Security, press, they're not far behind. You two can't stay here. We have a safe house ready. It's temporary, but it's safe. Jungkook's hand tightened around Taehyung's. Are we really doing this? Leaving Paris again? Taehyung looked into his eyes, steady and unwavering. Yes, for now. But this time we choose the direction. We choose each step. No one is writing our story but us. They packed quickly, efficiently, leaving behind only what was necessary. Every movement was charged with tension, yet a strange exhilaration ran beneath it. For years, they had existed within the rigid boundaries set by the industry, by expectations, by silence. Now, every breath was theirs to claim. As they exited the apartment into the rain-soaked streets, Taehyung felt the adrenaline surge. blending fear with liberation. Flashbulbs went off in the distance, reporters already tracking them, but he didn't flinch. His hand found Jungkook's, gripping tightly. They weren't running away anymore, they were moving forward, together. The ride to the safe house was tense. Every turn, every shadow was a potential threat, yet also a symbol of the life they now fully controlled. No contracts, no cameras, no public image, just two men reclaiming what had been theirs all along. When they arrived, the safe house was modest but secure. Windows barred from outside intrusion, security systems in place, minimal furnishings. It was anonymous, cold even, but it was theirs. Jungkook sank into a chair, exhaustion and relief mingling in equal measure. Taehyung hovered nearby, unwilling to let go, unwilling to let silence settle too heavily. Hours passed in quiet conversation, half confessions, half planning. They discussed what would happen next, statements, interviews, potential backlash, and the possibility of losing fans, sponsors, and control over their image. But none of it mattered compared to the truth they now shared, the bond they could no longer deny. Taehyung finally allowed himself a long exhale. "We're not invisible anymore," he said softly. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe we needed to be seen to be truly free." Jungkook looked up, eyes weary but glimmering with something Taehyung hadn't seen in years, unguarded hope. "Free together? Free together?" Taehyung nodded, smiling despite the storm raging outside and within. "Yes, together, always." And for the first time, Taehyung allowed himself to believe it, not the fantasy constructed by fans, headlines, or expectations, but a raw, messy, beautiful reality. A life, a love, a choice entirely their own. Outside, Paris rumbled with rain and chaos. But inside, in that cramped safe house, Taehyung and Jungkook began to rebuild. Piece by piece, word by word, touch by touch, they stitched together a life unbound by secrecy, unshaken by fear, and undeniable in its truth. The sun had barely begun its ascent, filtering through the gray Paris sky, when the first wave of reality hit. Outside the safe house, the city was alive, indifferent, and unforgiving. Taehyung sat by the window, fingers tapping against the sill, staring at the streets below where reporters and fans had begun their relentless search. Every flashing light, every honk of a car, every distant shout reminded him that the world outside no longer belonged to him. Jungkook leaned against him, exhaustion painted in the curves of his shoulders. They had survived the night, had survived the truth being exposed, but now the real challenge began. Statements would have to be crafted, stories told, and every misstep would be magnified 1,000 times. Taehyung could feel the weight of it pressing down on his chest, yet he refused to let fear dictate his next move. Not this time. Taehyung paced behind them, phone in hand, updating them constantly. Social media's exploding. Hashtags are trending, fans are divided, and some tabloids have already spun it into a narrative. YouTube betrayed your image, but the truth, your truth, is alive. People are talking. They're listening. Taehyung turned, letting his gaze meet Jungkook's. "We didn't betray anyone. We were brave enough to be real. That's all that matters." His voice was quiet but firm, carrying the weight of conviction that only comes from years of silence finally broken. The hours passed in a blur of news clips, live streams, and endless notifications. Each sting of a message sent adrenaline through Taehyung's veins, each comment a knife or a bomb. He had always lived in the carefully curated world of perfection controlled interviews, orchestrated smiles, public appearances, but now none of that mattered. Now every bit of his heart was unfiltered, every thought and feeling exposed. By mid afternoon, a plan was formed. They would make a joint statement, not just to appease fans or the media, but to reclaim their narrative. It wouldn't be perfect, it wouldn't be easy, but it would be theirs. Taehyung rehearsed the words silently, tasting the rawness of truth on his tongue. We're not asking for forgiveness, we're asking to live. Not as icons, not as idols, but as people who finally refuse to hide. When the cameras arrived, illegal paparazzi who had somehow tracked them to the neighborhood, Taehyung felt the familiar surge of nerves, the same that had haunted him for years. Yet this time it was different. He didn't flinch. He didn't hide. Jungkook's hand found his, and the touch grounded him, reminding him that whatever came next, they faced it together. The first interview was chaotic. Flashbulbs exploded, voices shouted questions, cameras swiveled in every direction. Taehyung's throat tightened, but he took a breath and let his voice carry. We've spent years hiding who we are because the world demanded it, he said, eyes locked on Jungkook's. But we're not going to hide anymore. This isn't a stunt. This isn't rebellion for attention. This is truth. This is love. And we refuse to be silenced. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Murmurs rippled. And for a moment, the frenzy paused as the sincerity in his words cut through the chaos. Jungkook spoke next, voice trembling but steadying with each word. We've made mistakes, choices driven by fear and expectation. But the most important thing we can do now is be honest. For ourselves, for each other, for everyone who has ever believed in us. The cameras continued, questions relentless, but Taehyung and Jungkook moved as one, unwavering. Every denial, every deflection, every carefully measured word of the past seemed irrelevant now. Here, in the raw glare of the world, they were finally untethered, breathing freely in a space they had carved with courage. Hours later, when the world began to digest what had been revealed, Taehyung finally allowed himself to sit, shoulders sagging with the weight of reality and relief intertwined. Jungkook rested his head on Taehyung's shoulder, and for the first time in years, the silence between them was comfortable, unbroken, sacred. Outside, Paris continued its indifferent rhythm, but inside, the air was lighter. They had taken the storm head on and survived, not unscathed, not unchallenged, but alive, honest together. Taehyung's gaze met Jungkook's, and a shared understanding passed between them. Whatever storms the world would send next, they had faced the fiercest one already, the fear of living their truth, and emerged stronger for it. As evening approached, they finally stepped outside into the rain-washed streets, unnoticed for the first time in years. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't safe, but it was theirs. Each step forward was a declaration, a rebellion against the cages they had endured for far too long. And with Jungkook at his side, Taehyung felt the pulse of possibility thrumming through him, a life reclaimed, a love untamed, a story finally theirs to tell. For the first time, Taehyung smiled fully, deeply, not for the world, not for the cameras, not for the image crafted over years. He smiled for them, for truth, for love, for freedom. And as they disappeared into the quiet, rain-kissed streets of Paris, he knew the journey was far from over, but for the first time, it would be theirs. The night deepened over Paris, yet the city seemed to pulse with electricity that mirrored the storm inside Taehyung's chest. Every street light, every distant siren, every echo of his own heartbeat reminded him that nothing would ever be the same. Jungkook walked beside him, quiet now, but his presence a constant tether that grounded Taehyung through the chaos. They found refuge in a small, nondescript apartment nestled in a quiet neighborhood, far from the cameras, the flashing bulbs, and the relentless gaze of fans and reporters. It was modest, almost painfully ordinary, yet it became their sanctuary, a space where the world's expectations could not touch them. Taehyung ran his fingers across the worn wooden table, tracing invisible lines, imagining the countless lives outside continuing in their oblivion. Here, only the truth existed. Taehyung had managed to handle most of the media chaos, keeping their whereabouts discreet and giving them time to breathe. But Taehyung knew this peace was temporary. The statement had gone viral. Headlines screamed across screens worldwide. Taehyung confesses love for Jungkook BTS scandal unfolds. Every notification, every ping was a reminder that the world was now watching. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of consequence pressing down. Jungkook finally spoke, his voice low and trembling. Do you think they'll ever forgive us? The fans, the company, everyone? His words were heavy with fear, yet threaded with an honesty that made Taehyung's chest tighten. He turned to him, cupping his face gently. It doesn't matter if they forgive us. What matters is that we're honest. For the first time in years, we're not living for anyone else's approval. The hours stretched, filled with quiet confessions and whispered reassurances. They shared memories they had hidden from the world, the late nights in the dorms, the laughter that echoed through empty hallways, the subtle touches that had become a secret language between them. Taehyung traced Jungkook's hand with his thumb, memorizing every line, every scar, every reminder of the years they had endured together. Sleep came reluctantly, each dozing moment punctuated by the fear of discovery, the anxiety of exposure, and the relentless pull of emotions long suppressed. Yet, in those brief moments, Taehyung felt a fragile serenity, an intimacy that was raw, unfiltered, and undeniably theirs. He knew the days ahead would demand courage, resilience, and strategy. But for the first time, he wasn't facing them alone. Morning arrived, soft and gray, the rain from the night before leaving the streets glistening under the diffuse light. Taehyung watched from the window, seeing the world resume its rhythm, oblivious yet relentless. The media frenzy had escalated overnight, but Taehyung assured them that immediate danger was contained. Still, the weight of public scrutiny hung in the air like a dense fog. Are you ready for this? Taehyung asked, breaking the silence, his voice carrying both challenge and reassurance. Jungkook nodded, drawing in a deep breath. We don't have a choice. We have to face it together. Taehyung squeezed his hand, a silent promise that no matter what came, they would navigate it side by side. The day unfolded with interviews, careful statements, and private conversations with managers and legal teams. Every word spoken, every gesture made was weighed against the inevitable scrutiny of millions. Taehyung felt the tension in his shoulders, the tightness in his chest, but also a growing sense of liberation. The world could judge, condemn, or even hate them, but at least they had reclaimed their story. By evening, the initial frenzy began to subside, giving them a brief window to breathe. They returned to the safe house, collapsing onto the worn couch in a tangle of limbs and exhaustion. The silence was thick but comforting, a rare respite from the relentless demands of the world. Taehyung rested his head on Jungkook's chest, listening to the steady beat of a heart that had always been a lifeline, a home he could return to no matter the chaos outside. You know, Jungkook murmured, voice muffled against Taehyung's hair. I never thought we'd make it this far, like this. Taehyung lifted his head, meeting his eyes. Neither did I, but here we are, and it's real, finally real. They laughed softly, a sound that carried years of relief, sorrow, and joy. It was unguarded, messy, human, a stark contrast to the polished perfection the world demanded. For a fleeting moment, they allowed themselves to imagine a future untethered from expectation, where love and truth were not crimes but courage. Night deepened once more, and as Taehyung lay beside Jungkook, staring at the ceiling of their modest sanctuary, he realized something profound. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, public backlash, industry politics, and personal consequences, but none of it mattered as long as they remained honest with themselves and each other.